Hello, everyone, and welcome to C-SHIP 4th Webinar Series edition. Today's webinar addresses culture and arts fair access and opportunities. Before we start, I would like to dedicate a quick moment for housekeeping. We have muted everyone by default. Please note that the webinar will be recorded, so please feel free to keep your camera on or off. The last 20 minutes is dedicated to questions and answers. You're welcome to use the chat box throughout, and you can click the microphone icon to mute or unmute yourself and interact with the speakers during the Q&A slot. I will start by giving a brief overview of C-SHIP, and then I will introduce our three bright speakers. So I'll be sharing my screen. So C-SHIP is a capacity building training which provides action learning, training, and awareness raising on cultural entrepreneurship, and it's designed for professionals in the cultural and creative industries and aspirants. It actually addresses 5 sectors: visual and performing arts, cultural heritage professionals, design, film and audiovisual production, and cultural institutions and museums. Our training program is designed to guide CCI's professionals and aspirants, especially on starting an entrepreneurial journey, ensure their financial viability, develop or strengthen their management skills, and maximize their societal contribution and positive impacts. The capacity building training is built on 5 interdependent pillars: innovation in business and operating models, building ecosystems and partnerships, sustainability and positive impacts, risk preparedness, and user experience. Our next cohort will take place from March to June 2025, and registration is currently open. Together with the training, we have also awareness raising activities, and this is in the format of a webinar series every year. This year's webinar series is reaching an end. So today's webinar on culture and arts fair access and opportunities is the 4th and last webinar of the season. I would like now to introduce our 3 speakers, and we'll start with Lonwabo Mavuso, who is the Executive Director at Andani.Africa. Throughout his career, he has contributed significantly to the creative industries, co-founding the Bafundi Film and TV Festival in partnership with the CABC, GFC, and NFVF. His previous roles include fundraising and partnership manager of Wits University, Drama for Life, marketing and operations manager, and later head of programs and development at Business and Arts South Africa. He also served as trade exhibition manager at South African Tourism and was the former chairperson of Atrial Network South Africa. Through his work at Andani.Africa, he led numerous research and creative economy projects across Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Ethiopia, and Malawi. Lonwabo holds both an PG Dip in Management and a BA in Dramatic Arts, majoring in Arts Management degree from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Welcome, Lonwabo. Our next speaker today will be Elena Polivtseva. She's an independent researcher and a passionate culture advocate. She worked as a senior researcher at IFACA, International Federation of Arts Councils and Culture Agencies, and as head of policy and research at ITEM, International Network for Contemporary Performing Arts. She authored several publications on cultural policies and funding strategies and artists' working conditions. She was one of the co-initiators and a project manager of Perform Europe, a board member at Culture Action Europe, and a consultant at UNESCO. Welcome, Elena. Our third speaker today, he hopefully might be joining us, is Jan Gozens. Jan was appointed as co-mission holder of Brussels 2030 in 2021. He studied literature and philosophy in Antwerp, Leuven, and London. He was artistic director of KVS in Brussels from 2001 to 2016 and general director of the Festival de Marseille from 2016 to 2022. Since 2015, he has been a co-artistic director of the festival Dream City in Tunis, together with Selma and Soufiane Weisi. Jan has been working on the intersection of artistic creation and metropolitan coexistence in Europe and in the Global South for more than 2 decades. I would like to welcome you all and welcome our speakers today. And without further ado, I would like to give you the floor with Lonwabo. As a director, actually, of Andani.Africa, in the past few years, you and your team have carried out very interesting research on fair access and opportunities in Africa. Could you please share some insights of the findings and tell us a bit about your unique storytelling methodology?
Let me pull up my presentation.
Sure.
Let's see if this shows. I don't know if you can see my screen.
It's coming. It's taking some time. Yes. Please share a full screen if it's possible. Yeah, maybe it's taking some time.
Okay. Just maybe before I start, just to give a bit of an intro around Andani.Africa. So we've been around since 2016, and we are a research and insights agency that works specifically in the creative economy in sub-Saharan Africa. And our core sort of focus is, as I said, research and insights, but also we do what we call data storytelling, where we share the insights that we find in the research process that we do to the broader community. And what we sort of found when we, certainly when we started Andani, was that the research that was done was very inaccessible to practitioners, to some decision makers. And so sort of introducing data storytelling was a way for us to kind of making research more accessible. We've been fortunate over the years to work in over 20 African countries. So we have a really good sort of a sense around what is happening, what are the shifts in the cultural and creative industries. And just before I start, just want to say thank you for this opportunity in presenting some of the findings that we have gathered in the various sort of research that we've done in different disciplines within the African continent. All right. So I'm thrilled to speak to you today about the extraordinary potential of Africa's cultural and creative industry and the urgent need to ensure fair access and opportunities for all. The vibrant stories, sounds, and visions emerging from the continent have long shaped the global culture. From the captivating beats of Afrobeats with artists like Burna Boy and WizKids making waves, and Amapiano blowing up internationally, with artists such as Tyler, Kabza De Small leading the pack, to the dazzling Maxhosa design seen on runways worldwide. Africa is bursting with talent. Yet, despite this immense promise, structural barriers continue to constrain the transformative power of these industries. Today, I want to explore the challenges that creatives face, highlight some remarkable innovation, and share a vision for a future where fair access enables African CCIs to thrive. The African creative economy is burgeoning, According to UNESCO, Africa's cultural and creative industries contributes $5 billion annually to the continent's GDP and employs over 5 million people. However, despite this number, our share of the global creative economy remains a modest 1.5%. What stands in our way is not talent, nor a lack of demand for African creativity. Instead, it is inequities in funding, infrastructure, and market access that continue to stifle this potential. Funding remains one of the most pressing challenges. Many African creatives operate in the informal economy, which excludes them from accessing formal financial systems. Consider Nigeria, home to Nollywood, the second largest film industry in the world. Despite producing over 2,500 films annually, Nollywood filmmakers often rely on informal loans and bootstrap their productions due to a lack of formal financing. Similarly, South Africa's film industry, while globally recognized, struggles with inequities in funding distribution. Black-owned companies often find themselves dependent on government grants, while white-owned companies display far greater resilience, benefiting from entrenched networks and private investment. However, streaming platforms such as Netflix are changing the game, providing more opportunities to Black-owned companies to produce films and TV series. Geography also shapes these inequities. Urban centers like Lagos, Johannesburg, and Nairobi are hotspots of creativity, attracting investment and talent. However, rural and peri-urban creatives often lack the infrastructure and networks needed to participate in the industry. For example, while Kenya is booming as a hub for creative tech, with initiatives like the Ignite Culture Fund and Netflix investment in local screen sector, these opportunities remain concentrated in Nairobi. Despite these challenges, the resilience and innovation of Africa's creatives continues to shine through. One of the most inspiring is the success of digital platforms in democratizing access to global markets. Empower Africa, founded by musician Mr. Easy, has transformed the lives of over 100 emerging artists by providing mentorship and financial support. Artists like Joe Boy and Jay DeRoby, who started their careers through Empower, are now recognized internationally. Similarly, Boomplay, Africa's leading music streaming platform, has declared $1 million investment to support Kenya's music production and distribution. These platforms are breaking barriers and allowing African creatives to own their narrative and monetize their work effectively. Beyond music, there are incredible success stories in film. In Senegal, the government's strategic cooperation agreements have attracted international filmmakers, resulting in critically acclaimed films like The Atlantics, which won the Grand Prix at the Cannes in 2019. Senegal's approach demonstrates the power of policies that integrates local talent with global platforms. Likewise, in Burkina Faso, FESPACO, Africa's largest film festival, has not only celebrated African storytelling, but also created pathways for local filmmakers to enter global markets. Fashion is another sector where African creativity is making waves. Nigeria's fashion industry is a powerhouse of innovation, blending traditional textiles with modern designs. Designers like Kenneth Ease and Lisa Foluio have gained international recognition, showcasing their collection of global runways. Yet, challenges such as competition from low-cost imports and limited access to global supply chains persist. Programs like the Africa Fashion International in South Africa are crucial in addressing these gaps by providing a platform for emerging designers to connect with international buyers. Craft, too, tell a story of opportunity and challenge. Morocco's handicraft sector contributes 10% of the country's GDP, exporting goods valued at over $76 million US annually. The crafts rooted in traditions are now finding global market through platforms like Now, an e-commerce site connecting artisans directly with buyers. However, many artists across the continent, particularly women in rural areas, still struggle to access these opportunities. While technology and platforms provide hope, we must address systemic issues for sustainable growth. Intellectual property rights remain a major barrier. In the music industry, piracy costs Africans millions annually, with over 5 million illegal downloads recorded monthly in sub-Saharan Africa. Strengthening copyright systems and collective management organization is crucial. For example, Francophone Africa, artists have turned to international organizations like SACM to ensure fair royalties, highlighting the gaps in domestic systems. Policy innovation is essential. Government must recognize CCIs as economic drivers and enact supportive policies. In Nigeria, the Creative Industries Financing Initiative, a partnership between the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Bankers Committee, provides loan for fashion, music, and film. This model of public-private partnership can be replicated across the continent to ensure equitable access to funding. Another example that could be replicated across the continent is Business and Arts South Africa, a public-private partnership between government and the private sector to lobby for private sector investment in the CCIs. We also need to address gender disparities in the creative industries. While women dominate sectors like craft and fashion, they remain underrepresented in leadership and technical roles. For instance, in South Africa's film industry, only 27% of decision-making roles are held by women. Programs like Sisters Working in Film and Sisters Working in Film and Television are tackling these challenges by providing mentorship and networking opportunities. Now, imagine a future where a young girl in rural Ghana can use digital tools to sell her crafts globally, where a filmmaker in Ethiopia can secure funding to bring her stories to life, and where a musician in Kenya can earn fair royalties for her streaming hits. This vision is not far-fetched. It is achievable if worked together. To achieve this, we must prioritize collaboration. Government, private sector, and civil society must work together to create an ecosystem that nurtures creativity. Investment must be patient, and inclusive, focusing not on immediate returns, but on long-term sustainability. Platforms like the Africa Continental Free Area can play a transformative role in opening a regional market for creatives. In closing, as we reflect on Africa's creative renaissance, let us remember that fair access is not just is an economic issue, but a matter of justice and equity. By removing barriers and creating opportunities, we not only empower individuals, but also strengthen our collective cultural identity. Africa's creators have already shown us what is possible through sheer talent and resilience. Imagine what they can achieve with the right support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lonwabo, for this very insightful and rich of concrete examples presentation. Actually, you started by providing us with a landscape of concrete opportunities and a richness of talents, but at the same time, a helicopter overview of the main difficulties into expanding and exploring the potential of these talents. So you provided a concrete example about the difficulty for the filming industry in Nigeria struggling to find funding, although it is recognized as an important and an important global player. You provided a great example from Lagos, Nairobi, and Johannesburg in terms of difficulties from rural and urban centers in terms of lack of infrastructure and networks, but you also provided the lack of opportunity in terms of market opportunities. Although there is a lot of interesting goods and products which these talents could exchange at the global scale. You provided the example of Senegal, for example. You also provided the crafts from Africa. There's a lack of platform in order to give voice, but also marketable produce exchange with these talents. You also draw some conclusions with regards to gender disparities and how this, but you also provided solutions on how to mind these gaps. And you also described beautifully the very urgent aspect of protecting intellectual property rights and how talents should be copyrighted, but should also receive fair royalties. Finally, you provided a very interesting, very important conclusion, which that investments should be patient and inclusive. Patient is the most important part of the story because these processes are lengthy, they take time, and investors should understand, impact investors should understand how this works. This is because investing in these talents would give the opportunity to transformative talents to play a role globally. Thank you very much, Lonwabo, for this really holistic overview of the situation of fair access in Africa. I'll move to you, Elena, now, seeing all your research activities with regards to fair access, actually globally, but with a specific zoom in Europe. Lately, you were following on all the development of the newly elected European Parliament, but also the newly appointed European Commission. Could you please share with us some insights with regards, at least to your expectations based on the last year's developments in parliamentary work with regards to fair access? What are the future prospects? What is expected, and what are the opportunities to look for?
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Ruba, for introducing me so that I don't have to do it now myself. In regard to your question and the topic of this webinar about the fair access and opportunity in the arts, this is, of course, directly related to socioeconomic situation and status of artists. And this is by no means a new topic. So probably you know about the UNESCO recommendation on artist status, which was adopted some years ago. And this recommendation will turn 45 years in 2025. And so for 45 years now, I think data and research, also the ones produced by UNESCO itself, testify that the actual situation of artists and their status is not really improving, it's not only getting worse. And this was, of course, revealed in the COVID-19 pandemic, when we lost globally 10 million jobs in the culture and creative sectors. And it was kind of a very intense and short period to reveal all these structured fragilities in the cultural sector. So it was, of course, very negative, but also to some extent positive, because the topic of status of the artist suddenly became legitimate to be discussed at the national level, at the European level, at the global level. So all of a sudden, this topic became important. And let's say which is even because it's always been kind of important, but it became normalized. So this discussion was welcome at different levels. And input from artists and cultural workers was asked at different forums, and some legislative and policy activity has been happening in many countries. And if we talk about Europe, there are some countries in which new laws were introduced, such as Belgium, Spain, Romania, Portugal, and some interesting programs were tested, like, for example, basic income scheme for Ireland, in Ireland for artists. So, but what do we actually mean when we talk about status of the artist? So it is by definition a very complex and diverse field. So status of the artist, it's a notion that encompasses all frameworks and policies which allow artists, which regulate artists' situation in regard to social security, but also labor relations, also access to learning and skills, and different aspects of artistic freedom. And how this is regulated in different European countries, it very much depends on different factors, such as what kind of cultural policy system exists there, what kind of socioeconomic situation the country is currently facing, and also importantly, maybe the most important factor is actually what kind of social contract exists in relation to recognizing the value of culture in society and acknowledging artists as workers, because these type of acknowledgements are very different in different countries in Europe. And so very roughly, some previous research was done on this topic, and we can group the current laws, let's say the current systems that exist in European countries pretty much in 4 different types. So the first one, there are few countries in Europe which actually have a law on the status of the artist, which is called often as such, or status of cultural professionals, which encompasses all these different elements I was listing before, trying to find interconnection between them. So how education, for example, art education relates to social security, or how social security relates to labor contracts, etc. There are only a few countries in Europe which have such laws. Some of them are now in development. Many countries have a law that just addresses a specific legislative branch, be it social security, be it taxation, or anything else which pertains to the artistic, to the status of the artist. In many countries, there are, let's say, nothing specific to artists as such, but there are amendments or different specific articles in existing legislative frameworks. And finally, of course, there are also countries where there is nothing really special regulating artistic situation. So what is also interesting is, like, many of these frameworks more focusing on the hardship of artists, basically trying to protect them in case of hardship. So in order to apply, you have to prove that you're in a difficult situation. And some other frameworks kind of looking inverse at the achievements of artists. So no matter in which situation you are, you just need to prove that you have been active, you have been successful, the more the better, and then you get this kind of let's say, reward. So these are also very interesting, quite contrasting, actually, systems that exist in different countries. Probably it's a very famous problem, but there is also an issue of definitions. What do we mean by artist? This is quite a stubborn obstacle to unifying anything. So in different countries, I would say, looking at the overview, there's pretty much nowhere where a law uses the word artist as such. These terms are creative worker, cultural worker, work professional in culture. Now I'm really citing real terms which exist in different laws. This is also because, and this is also a trend, recent trend, encompassing different professions, jobs, and roles into this definition. Not only artists, not only creator, let's say, but also people who facilitate the whole process in the cultural sector, which is quite positive development. And I think especially in COVID-19 pandemic, it was clear that the whole ecosystem is precarious. And if we don't, and even if it's probably not all professions are extremely precarious, but if things start to fall apart and people actually leave the sector, be it technicians, producers, managers, etc., this hits back the actual artists. So there is this tendency to protect or to, let's say, include different jobs into this artist status, so-called. And another tendency that we can observe in many different countries is indeed to try to make things clear, because artists, as we often say, they take different jobs. And this is not just about different jobs, it's also about different situations. You can be self-employed, at the same time run a little enterprise, and at the same time be partly employed somewhere. So it is very hard already in this kind of tapestry to understand what rights you have and where is the actual like way out of your hardship if you need to apply for support, etc. So there is this tendency in different countries to actually unify all these and create some complementarity between measures, which is also a positive trend. But if we look at Europe, which is an important level, even if we know notoriously European Union is quite limited in the sense of cultural policies, but also in the field of social security and labor relations. However, it is very important that Europe does create very important ripple effects for member states, but also actually for countries even which are not part of European Union. So what happened at the EU level in this field is that in 2007, quite a long time ago, there was already an attempt to introduce a status of the artist, or at least to address this topic some kind of in a consolidated way at the EU level. There was a report initiated by the European Parliament, which very quickly the debate was stifled. The debate has died quite quickly because there wasn't political will, and there was also no fertile ground whatsoever to discuss this topic then. Surprisingly, or maybe actually not, between 2020 and 2023, there were 3 different reports issued by Parliament on this topic, and the third one, which was adopted in 2023, actually became a resolution. A resolution has a more weight than just a report, so which asked for 3 things. Well, first of all, it is asked for some kind of EU vision on artist status. A vision is a very broad term, but let's say common unified approach to this topic. So the resolution asked for a specific framework, let's say for a legal instrument, a directive at the EU level to regulate this field, to introduce some minimum standards, or to create this kind of setting in which there could be at least an attempt to define standards, not to enforce anything. This is not really possible. The second thing was that the resolution asked was social conditionality. This is a technical term which means that EU programs which support culture would enforce compliance with fair pay or other aspects of fair working conditions for beneficiaries of EU programs. And the third was to intensify basically peer exchange between member states, which sounds quite like light, but in fact it is not, because since member states are the only ones responsible for actual progress in this field, this exchange, like the OMC process, another technical term, it does create a lot of ripple effects when member states, like ministries, get together and discuss these issues and track each other's progress. So, but European Union resolution as such is not really a law. So the European Commission was supposed to respond with some kind of a directive or anything to that. And in basically in the beginning of this year, somewhere in late winter, the Commission responded to that according to the official rules, in which, if to be very brief, very general, the window of this opportunity wasn't closed. But obviously, since it was just before, or let's say before the actual shift of political priorities, before the European elections, there weren't like very concrete and very strong commitments made. It was said that working conditions will remain to be an important topic in the European Union strategy, upcoming strategy, and there will be some more exchanges and more gap analysis, and something eventually will come about. And the possibility of exploring social conditionality in EU programs will also be explored. So what can we expect? That was actually your question. I thought it was very important to actually explain where we stand now before we say what we can actually expect. So there are some positive things in place. The first one, of course, is that Commission response, which is rather, let's say, enthusiastic about that perspective. Maybe enthusiastic is a big word, but as I said, the door towards some kind of positive future is not shut. And also, more tangible element in the Commission approach here is that the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, in her mission letter to the new commissioner, which was back then a nominated commissioner, let's say, Glenn Mikulev, So the president put in her mission letter to him several priorities, and one of them was working conditions in the culture and creative sectors. This is quite historic element. It has never been actually featured at that high level, this topic, coming out of the mission letter of the European Commission president. So there is indeed a chance that something is going to be done. And the commissioner, who is now confirmed himself during his hearings at the European Parliament, did commit to following up on that without, of course, any concrete promises, not going really beyond what the European Commission already promised in its response. He also referred quite a lot to the so-called competitiveness of culture creative sectors, which is kind of in resonance with the overall strategic focus of the whole European Commission on this competitiveness. So this is not very clear how the actual fairness in the culture and creative sectors will be actually matched with European competitiveness of the EU, because how competitiveness is now defined at the EU level, it is not necessarily in like focusing on unconditional public support for such schemes like basic income in the arts. So the Commission is, of course, not the only player in this debate. There is also European Parliament, which has renewed after elections in June. So if you look at the composition of European Parliament now, it has never been that right-wing. So there is the Green Party, for example, lost 1/3 of its votes, and the right-wing and extreme right-wing members of the European Parliament have increased in numbers. If we look at our Culture and Education Committee, which has 30 members, it is as right-wing and as polarized, let's say, at the Parliament itself. So just looking at these people, 30 people, is of course not enough to say what can we expect. So we of course have to dig a little bit further. What do each of these members stand for? So we've done this analysis of their national party manifestos of the 30 members of the Culture Committee. And interesting, of course, not so surprising, but there is a very vast gaps between how these different national parties represented see culture. From basically being preoccupied with national cultural identities and teaching their culture to migrants, etc., to seeing culture as a more inclusive concept, as a public good, or let's say thinking about more integration at the EU level in cultural field. So there are these kind of polarized views, which is quite interesting for us will be to see how do these people actually going to be agreeing on anything when it will come to culture, be it working conditions or any other topic. But what is interesting is that not only socialists or other parties on the progressive side, but also some of the conservative and right-wing parties actually interested in working conditions in the cultural sector and the status of the artist. So I think there is this overall understanding, or maybe it's a trend, or maybe it's something, because for some time we always heard about access, about passport for culture, etc., like coming in all party manifestos. Now I think there is this new trend of talking about precarity that needs to be addressed in the cultural sector. So there is definitely, this is definitely positive. And of course, we have the member states themselves, which will in the end be very important players in taking any decision. Here, as I said, there's a very diverse approaches, but maybe just to finish on a positive note, that G20, it's a group of 20 state leaders, not cultural ministers, very importantly. They met somewhere in autumn, in October, and issued, or was it in November, issued their declaration, which included several, like many different things on many different topics. And one of these things was they asked for fair pay of all things. They asked for fair pay in cultural and creative sectors. So we're talking about heads of states of 20 countries in the world who in their declaration asking for fair pay in cultural and creative sectors. Of course, we know that these kind of commitments, they often end up being kind of reversed or forgotten, but there's this consistent, slow trend of pushing for this topic from all sides. And I just wanted to share with you one link. So there is a platform that's together with the Creative Leap project, or basically by Creative Leap project that is created, which actually would help you to follow on the progress, at least in Europe, on the legislative activity, basically. So this platform includes, for the moment, not a lot of information, but just in a few days, there will be much more uploaded. And there is already quite some texts about policy and regulatory frameworks that currently exist in 27 member states relating to culture and creative sectors' socioeconomic situation. So that's an important tool because it helps us actually to see the progress. Otherwise, it's easy to get lost in the 27 country diversity. So that's a bit like the positive and a more constructive ending of my overview. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, for this wonderful mapping. Actually, rightly so, you started from the UNESCO recommendation regarding the artist status and the fact that there is something that exists at the global level, which we've been building on since the 80s. Then you highlighted the difficulty of having different legislative and different tools and measures at every member states with regards to the status of artists and existing frameworks regarding social security, skills, artistic freedom, etc. Of course, there are some very innovative and forerunner initiatives, while this is not the case in other countries. So there's a discrepancy of what exists and where we should go altogether, especially that the European Union doesn't have the mandate in general on culture, but it could lead with, as you rightly said, on some resolutions from the Parliament and some directives from the European Commission. What is very important, actually, is also the timeline which you draw with regards of the latest developments at the European Union level, starting from 2007, where there was a first attempt to address the artist status, but which, for the lack of political will, went into how do you say it became in the shadow of political agendas, and it was because of COVID-19 that in 2022 and 2023 three different studies were run by the European Parliament. As you rightly highlighted, three important points were drawn up, and there is some follow-up hopefully coming with the new commissioner focusing on the artists' rights and working conditions, seeing the difficulty of understanding the characteristics of the sector and the fact of wearing several hats and several jobs at the same time. Finally, you closed with two hopeful remarks. The first is the one of the G20 tackling the fair pay in their meeting in November, and the second of the Creatives Unite platform, where all the legislative frameworks are being mapped and collected and is accessible to everyone in order to be more aware of what exists, but also be capable of raising voice in the future. Thank you very much to the both of you for this very different but similar perspective from two different continents, because of course difficulties are context-based, but the problematics and challenges related to the artistic practices are similar in both continents. So maybe just to open the discussion, how do you see, we are speaking more and more about solidarity, solidarity and fair access in the field. So how do you see solidarity and exchange between the two continents now in terms of fair pay, in terms of supporting artists at risk and displaced artists, in terms of the ecological transition, in terms of the digital transition, but more importantly, with the rise of extreme right all over the world. So maybe I leave the floor to the two of you to provide first insights in this regard.
I don't know if you want to go first. It's a good question because I think whenever I have to speak about progress made in the area of working conditions, which happens kind of gradually, but still there is some kind of positive dynamic, let's say. But then if we look at the public funding cuts that we face now in Europe, really happening across the whole continent, it's not just in some parts of it, so which are used to it, but it also happens now in countries and in cities which are really not used to face that. There are some very important cultural programs like museums for free, etc., in some capitals are being actually cancelled after decades of existing. So there is a quite a precarious situation upcoming, and not only in terms of finances, but also in terms of freedoms. Because we have been observing a lot of instances of artistic freedom being attacked, etc. So there are many, many examples of all that. So Europe is really facing an interesting period indeed after these political shifts. So how do we see solidarity? I think, first of all, solidarity becomes something very natural, something very necessary. So it's not just like, okay, we have our resources in place, we have our tours planned, we have all this is going well, but okay, we still need to show some solidarity. I think now it all goes a little bit the other way around. So I think that's also what emerges from other research I'm currently doing, which is not yet published anywhere, but international work for the sector is becoming more important, which is kind of paradoxical because you have less means to actually pursue it, but it's becoming much more vital, much more important. There is this commitment to grow in international field more than ever. So it is quite a new thing because in COVID, we were like all semi-dreaming about some local withdrawing from all these never-ending relationships. Like we were thinking about rethinking completely, being more sustainable environmentally, etc., and maybe connecting more digitally. But now there is this call, this quest for actual stronger ties across borders coming from different parts. And I think the interest is really shifting towards support, like building infrastructures of trust, of resilience. And by infrastructures, I don't mean the houses and the roads. I really mean some kind of stable foundations, backbones of collaboration, networks, smaller cooperatives, I don't know, cross-border unions, spaces and models to share resources, exchange of knowledge, safety nets, but safety nets not only in the sense of finances, but also in the sense of when you're attacked locally, nationally, when you face hardship, many different fields, when you just need emotional support. So all these kind of infrastructures which would help to exercise trust, which is so needed in societies, they are really emerging. And I think this will be more of that. And I also think that policies, those policies which are still there to support the arts, with not those which are really not interested in. And now I'm really talking about institutes, which are still really fighting for it, and government agencies. They will be more and more thinking, okay, how can we sustain what we have? And I think there will be probably, hopefully, shift from multiplication of projects, multiplication of tours, multiplication of visible initiatives towards more supporting these resilience networks and these infrastructures of trust, and also these, let's say, tissues that are needed, basically. Something that is not very visible currently. And maybe also that's why it also struggles to prove its point. But I hope there will be more investment in this, what makes it actually sustainable. And this is not just about the outputs and commodities and all these kind of things which prove that we're busy. I think it's more about connections and ties. So that's a bit how I see it.
Thank you very much, Elena. Lonwabo?
Sure. I absolutely agree with you, Elena, and I think sort of just to add to the points that you're making around particularly maybe starting with solidarity, and I concur in that there is really a need to sort of have these mutual beneficial relationships across the continent. I think there's some key learnings, particularly as we see this very polarized world, key learnings that sort of Africa can share to the rest of the world in being an artist in very sort of difficult times, and how do we use the arts as a way of activism and bringing back our humanity. I do think that there is sort of a growing sort of that need for exchange of ideas and ideas sort of even moving beyond sort of artistic practice, but also looking at structural sort of things within sort of the creative economy that makes creative economy sort of succeed and robust. And I think certainly from the African continent and from the research that we've done for a few clients, there's always been sort of, when you're talking about continental exchange, has always been mostly around artistic sort of exchange, but not necessarily looking at what makes sort of the creative economy structures and systems functions effectively. And I think there's both key learnings that could happen across border. I think also for Africa, I think whilst I think we've drummed up the importance of cultural and creative industries and its power in terms of transforming economies, in terms of social impact and social transformation, I think where we are certainly lacking is this question around policy. How do we support our policymakers to understand and also to develop policies in ways in which that it makes sense in advancing our societies? I think we are, conceptually, policymakers and decision makers understand the power of creative economy, but we don't see that translating in policy imperatives on the rest of the continent. So I think in terms of fair access, I think we need to sort of do a lot of work in working with policymakers and showing them how they begin to kind of make policy considerations that benefit the cultural and creative industries. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Lonwabo. I think you both stressed three very important points, which are mutual trust, resilience, and solidarity. So building infrastructures, conveying the message, and supporting policy in transforming in meaningful ways societies, but also use arts as activism to bring back humanity, as you stated. Maybe it's time to open the floor to some questions, if any. You can either drop your question in the chat box, or you just unmute yourself and address the question either to Elena or Lonwabo or both.
I don't have a specific question, just Ruba, first of all, I think it's very interesting that you, in the framework of a series of seminars on entrepreneurship in the culture and creative industries, you introduced this topic. which might feel that is a bit aside, but still it is central and it has to be addressed and it has to be understood also by those that entrepreneur in the cultural and creative industries. And I think both interventions were very pertinent to work that I'm doing. Lonwabo, I'm working on or understanding a bit the funding and how the European funding actually creates inequalities in Africa in terms of access, in terms of understanding entrepreneurship, in terms of imposing certain models that exclude or include some other people. So I find this quite interesting listening to you. And I think that Elena also raised the point that we did not really discuss is how can this notion of status of the artist can also be expanded to more to other professional categories in the field. And I think this is going to be an important point to put forward in a complex scenario. Yeah, great workshop.
Lonwabo, would you like to share
Sure.
something? Yeah,
Absolutely. Maybe just to sort of reflect on I think that's fascinating research. As soon as it's public available, I'd love to sort of engage in that research. And I think there has been sort of also among sort of peoples that I have engaged, sort of a critique and an observation around sort of European funding and how perhaps it is sort of in many ways overly bureaucratic in ways that sort of stifles and also kind of disadvantages those organizations perhaps that don't have the structures that are required to manage sort of European funding. And we're finding that there are a handful of organizations that meet sort of those rigorous requirements to benefit from this funding. So having the same people receiving the same funding over and over again. And I think that's the point, a point that has been sort of been in debate and conversation. And I think in numerous times, particularly around European funding that are funders that are funding in Africa, there has been that feedback to say, could there be ways in which that we look at funding and support the cultural and creative industries in Africa in ways that enables and develops organization rather than it being a very bureaucratic and almost sometimes punitive experience in sort of receiving funding. I think also attached to that is also this question around that comes with funding and finance around evaluation frameworks, around when you receive those funding, who does that sort of evaluation impact benefit the most? And often that you fill those impact evaluation I suppose, documents, and you learn less about your organization, and yet those frameworks are so onerous in terms of completing and benefit mostly the funder. And so questions around how can it be a much more sort of co-beneficial sort of experience. So I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of the dynamics of funding on the African continent and how perhaps also to shift from granting, from aid to investment and all those kinds of things. So yeah.
I wrote to your message on chat.
Okay, thank you very much, Lonwabo. I see you, Teresa, turning on your camera. Would you like to participate, contribute to the conversation?
Hello, everyone. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much as well for great presentations. I would have a question for each of the two presenters. I think I would start with you, Elena, if I may. I read you are a senior researcher at Culture Policy Room. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more what the Culture Policy Room is. If this is an institution, if this is an independent consultancy, if you could maybe give some descriptions, please.
Culture Policy Room is a very young initiative which was started just before, let's say, European summer break, and now exists for a few months. It is not an institution, and it's also not a consultancy. So it is a think tank, and it is we are with a couple of peers doing that, trying to test this model of actually trying to be proactive with research rather than work as consultants, which means that there are a lot of gaps, a lot of questions, a lot of areas in which we need often good insights in order to influence policies. And I felt that when I was previously in advocacy roles, that very often something is cooking. Like now I presented to you a lot of things which are cooking in different places in Europe. And you think like, wait, what does that mean? And then you know that it's not going to work, or maybe you think maybe it's going to work, what they want to do in half a year. And we always lack kind of maybe compilation of existing research or good policy brief about how should it be best done in order to succeed. I'm just giving you quite a concrete example of what a think tank can do. So it is a more proactive approach to providing insights to those who take decisions. Very often, it is quite different from consultancies because it is, it is a more kind of filling the gap rather than responding to a call, or maybe proposing something for what then you generate debate rather than reacting to the debate. So, as I said, it's a young initiative, and how it will be developing, it is right now being kind of, it's very important, in exactly what kind of structure will support it in the future. So it is important for its independency and for the actual quality of its work. So I think that's what I can tell you right now about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. This sounds very interesting, also very promising. And it's like as if you identified a need and you took it to an independent level where you bring people together to address those questions and come up with maybe new and more interesting responses. Well, thank you very much. And the other question I would address to Lonwabo, if I pronunciate that correctly. What were your most surprising or best insights that you have gained in the research about Africa? And which of those insights you would think would inform your decisions the most for Africa's future?
Sure. I think there are quite a number of insights that we've come across. And what sort of comes to mind for me, and I suppose what was in the presentation, was around the power of women in the creative industries and their ability to transform societies. In the research that we did around the film and TV industry, particularly in South Africa, around the role of, or rather the state of transformation of the film and TV industries. The research showed that if you empower women and if you give women opportunities in the film and TV industries, they're 4 times likely to employ more women, people living with disabilities, and generally marginalized communities than all other sort of categories. Women on the continent continuously to be drivers of, I suppose, equitable access to creative economy on the continent, and very little investment is made in terms of their sort of be it an organization or be it enterprises. So for me, I would say and youth, women are more likely also to empower young people. So for me, I would say that if one of the key insights, if you are looking to sort of impact the creative economy on the continent, and you're looking to sort of invest and wanting to know where to sort of invest, I would say most likely you should look at sort of women-run organization or companies, and they have a much more bigger ripple effect. I think the second sort of insight for me from the research that we've gathered is that whilst Africa has immense talent, there's still a long way to go with regards to sort of training. There are not enough sort of training institutions that really can take artists from really a sort of a hobby or operating from talent to a really professionalized sort of output of what they're doing. So I think training academies are absolutely crucial in Africa, not just from a training from a practice perspective, but also from an entrepreneurial perspective. Those trainings that are there with regards to perhaps artistic training, they focus on the craft and less around the business of being an artist. And so I would say if we had sort of more training that also looked at sort of sustainability issues around the cultural and creative industries, I think we will go very far. We'll go very far in the cultural and creative industries.
Thank you very much. That was a very amazing answer. So, in short, women are the future in Africa, and
Absolutely.
craft and business can bring more, maybe with exchange trainings, maybe even with exchange programs, maybe even with different networks. Since you mentioned before digital platforms, maybe new opportunities can be created through that, where this exchange between artists and business people can take place in new, exciting, and different ways too.
Absolutely. And sorry, just on that point, and you're right, and also doesn't always have to be sort of formalized training, but it could be through sort of mentorships and exchanges. At the time when I was working at Business and Arts South Africa, we ran a program between the private sector and creatives, where there was a mentorship and an exchange. Initially, when we were sort of running this program, we thought it would be one way. The creatives just impart, or rather the business people imparting knowledge and helping artists to better run their organizations. But over time, we saw actually it was very much a mutual beneficial relationship, because artists also began to teach business people different ways of thinking and inspiring them to be much more creative in terms of the work that they do. So yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. I would have one follow-up question, if I may. Would you say that maybe informal training, like bridging, for example, generations, could maybe fill a gap, like with all the creative fields? Like, for example, like older generation, they were like having all those different and great skills about crafting. And many of those things are kind of getting lost. But those generations could be brought together, like older, more mature generations and the young ones. The younger ones come with some new ideas that probably a bit more in the digital side, but they could add something new. And on the way, in the process, maybe they could even create something. So I personally even think that maybe new trainings in the future is something probably between something old and something new, meeting somewhere in between and creating something that hasn't been there yet. One doesn't need to always reinvent the wheel completely, but take different elements and reshuffle a bit. Maybe something new comes out.
Absolutely. I agree with you that intergenerational sort of exchange is absolutely crucial. And the question is, how do we facilitate those sort of relationships, you know, particularly when the youth is literally glued on their phones and on their screens, and trying to take them out of that to engage and interact. Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. There is sort of skills and knowledge that we potentially may be losing.
Well, thank you very much. That's from my side.
Are there any additional questions or comments? I don't see anything in the chat, but maybe it's worth mentioning that you, Martina, you have shared the publication on measuring culture's impact in development cooperation. So it's a practical guide which you can download online, and it was published under the framework of Practitioners Network for European Development Cooperation in collaboration with Tiva for Social Innovation and Culture. So
No, the only reason why I shared it was because we tackle fair evaluation that Lonwabo pointed out. And I think that is also an important thing, especially because evaluation produces value and is also the legacy that remains afterwards of different projects.
absolutely. And I thought it was very useful. This is why I shared the title for people rewatching later on YouTube. I think we reached the end of today's webinar. We are leaving the webinar with a lot of food for thought. I will borrow your metaphor, Elena. We are heading towards interesting times in a very polarized world that needs a mutual trust, resilience, and solidarity, and a lot of collaboration together, and a lot of patient and constructive investment from Lonwabo. So before waving goodbye, I would like to inform you that today's webinar was the last webinar for this season. I would like to thank our two bright speakers, Elena and Lonwabo. Thank you all for attending the webinar, and also a big thank you to my colleague Karen for taking care of all organizational matters. You will receive a follow-up email asking you to evaluate the webinar and propose new topics for the upcoming fifth season of webinars for 2025. So please do. And if you wish to rewatch this webinar, the recording will be available next week on eShek's YouTube channel and CSHIP's LinkedIn page. Thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.